Mousetronaut by astronaut Mark Kelly. Mousetronaut, based on a partially true story. The space shuttle is set for a launch, and the astronauts are doing their last-minute training to prepare for the mission. NASA is sending along some special guests for this flight, and they're training too. One mouse is smaller than all the rest. His name is Meteor. The other mice know he won't be chosen for this important mission. But someone has his eye on Meteor, and he's impressed with the little mouse's hard work. The shuttle commander announces that 6 mice will be selected for the flight, and he picks 5 of the biggest, strongest mice. But for the 6th spot, to everyone's surprise, he chooses Meteor! All 6 are taken to their new home, a special cage called the Mouse Hotel, and the other mouse are nervous as the countdown begins, but not Meteor. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1! Blast off! It actually says lift off, but that's okay. At first, the mice are pressed flat against their cages by the power of the launch. But then the pressure goes away and the other mice cling to their cage in terror. But not Meteor. He loves the feeling of weightlessness. "Hey, little guy," the commander says, "you're a natural, a real live Mousetronaut." Meteor is taken from his cage and gets a tour of the shuttle. He can even see the Earth way off in the distance. The astronauts are all very busy during the 14-day flight. There are spacewalks to take and experiments to conduct, but what can Meteor do to help? Then, while answering emails, one of the astronauts notices the key to the control panel is stuck between the monitors. When he tries to get it out, it accidentally gets wedged farther down. "This is not good," says the commander. "We need that key back." One astronaut tries to move the monitor, but it does not budge. Another slips her fingers into the crack, but the key is stuck down too deep. One even tries pushing it out with a long piece of metal, but with no luck. No one can even reach it. The astronauts are getting worried, but as they discuss the problem, a tiny figure has an idea. Being the smallest isn't a bad thing. Meteor says to himself, "Maybe I can be useful on this flight." Meteor squeezes his way through the crack, and the space is dark and cramped, but Meteor spots the key and tugs at it with all of his might. "Hey, look at what our tiny friend has done," the commander says. "He saved the mission." When the shuttle returns to Earth, Meteor is declared a hero. He's even given a brand new uniform and an official title, Mousetronaut. All of the astronauts cheer and applaud, but Meteor is already thinking about his next big mission. "I flew with a few mice during my first flight on space shuttle called Endeavour. Just as NASA takes care of its human astronauts, animals are treated with consideration for their needs too. Special cages were constructed with mesh that the mice could grip with their toes. Pressurized water containers and compressed food were installed, and a waste contamination system was created to keep things clean. During my first flight in 2001, there was 18 mice on board. All of them, with the exception of one, clung to the side of the mesh during the entire mission. One mouse smaller than all the rest, seemed to enjoy the experience and effortlessly floated around the cage. The story of Mousetronaut is inspired by that mission. We all watched him as he enjoyed the feeling of being weightless. I started to think about that mouse and what it would be like to have him as a part of our crew. That real mouse stayed in the research cage through the mission, but he is what I base this story on. And that experience is the partially true part of this story. For most of human existence, people have longed to overcome the pull of gravity and fly above the earth. This remained just a dream until December 17, 1903, when the Wright brothers launched the first manned airplane, the Flyer, and challenged the birds for a place in the skies. That first flight lasted only 12 seconds, rising a height of 20 feet and covered a distance of 120 feet. In the following years, faster, more sophisticated planes were developed and air travel flourished. The idea that space travel was a distant dream changed in 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite into orbit around the Earth. The United States was determined to catch up and surpass the Soviets in outer space as well as on Earth. Both nations were in a competition to prove which one was more powerful. The race into space had begun. Schools challenged students to work harder in science and math, and more money was put into education and research. In 1958, Congress created NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. In 1961, President Kennedy committed to have a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And many people thought this was impossible, too. Too dangerous, too complicated, too expensive. However, this goal was achieved, and on July 20th, 1969, the United States won the race to the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men to walk on the moon. They planted a flag and left a plaque that read, "Here, men from the planet Earth set foot on the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." The ingenuity, persistence, and courage of many people had turned what had been science fiction fantasy into a reality. In 1981, NASA launched the Space Shuttle, the first reusable spacecraft. Prior to the shuttle, spacecraft did not survive more than one voyage, and the costs were becoming prohibitive. The shuttle was built to be used multiple times and designed with three main components: the orbiter that transports crew and cargo, two booster rockets, and a fuel tank. While both boosters and fuel tank are jettisoned during liftoff, the boosters are recoverable. The only part not reusable, the external fuel tank, burns up after liftoff and the pieces fall into the Pacific Ocean. The shuttle, which takes off like a rocket, lands like an airplane with the orbiter gliding onto a runway. On the launch pad, the space shuttle stands about 180 feet high, pictured 32 men standing on top of one another, and with a full payload and fully fueled weighs about 4.5 million pounds. The space shuttle flew for 30 years. When the program ended in July 2011, its fleet had grown to include 5 orbiters: Atlantis, Challenger, Columbia, Discovery, and Endeavour. All the orbiters were named after historical ships of exploration. Endeavour was named after Captain James Cook's famous ship that made voyages of discovery to Australia and New Zealand in the late 1700s. The name was selected in a competition by schoolchildren. The space shuttles have flown 306 men and 49 women from 16 different countries during the 135 missions, racking up over 537,001,014 and 16 miles, the equivalent of over 21,500 times around the Earth at a speed of about 17,500. In 2010, it costs about $775 million for each space shuttle mission. The cost for the entire program was about $113.7 billion. The space shuttle helped build the International Space Station, transported and repaired satellites, deployed and serviced the Hubble Space Telescope, and conducted leading-edge experiments. Travel in space is not for the faint-hearted. Zero gravity, maintaining an adequate air supply, and cramped quarters are among the challenges the astronauts face. To qualify for a place on a space shuttle mission, a military background or advanced degree in science, engineering, or medicine are important. In addition, astronauts must undergo rigorous training. The crew practices in simulated environments that replicate the conditions in space and take survival courses that require them to cope with the unexpected emergencies. And they have to learn how to live and maneuver in zero gravity, where they and everything on board are weightless and apt to float around unless they are tethered. They have to learn how to go to the bathroom in space, how to eat and sleep in space. Since water doesn't flow like it does on Earth, astronauts clean themselves with wet wipes or washcloths, one with liquid soap and a wet one to rinse. They can use special products that scientists have created for space travel, such as foamless soap that doesn't require water. They use dry shampoo for their hair and swallow their toothpaste. Ugh. They go to the bathroom on toilets that use flowing air instead of water. Waste products are stored in the spaceship and disposed after they land. They have special exercise machines to help them keep in shape because a floating treadmill especially weighs an exercise bikes. Their diet includes over 400 different meals, snacks, and drinks. Some are freeze-dried and water has to be added. Solid food is also available, and magnets are used to keep forks and knives from floating off the table. When they are not busy working, the astronauts can read or play games or communicate with friends and family, and even school children by email or video links. Astronauts are not the only travelers in space. In fact, they were not the first. The earliest space travelers were animals. Scientists wanted to see the effects of weightlessness before sending people into space. Fruit flies were the first to be sent. Mice and monkeys soon followed. Although these flights only reached suborbital altitudes, in 1957, Laika, a dog, became the first animal actually sent into orbit. She was launched into space by the Soviets on Sputnik 2. Although Laika did not survive the flight, she captured the attention of the world. In 1959, two monkeys, Abel and Baker, were carried in the nose cone of an American Jupiter missile to a 300-mile altitude. They returned to Earth successfully. In 1961, a chimpanzee named Ham became the first chimp in space. More than a passenger, Ham had a mission. Could he perform the task he had been trained for on Earth while traveling thousands of miles per hour in space? Would he be able to push a lever on a cue? He would, and he could. After his service, Ham retired to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., where he lived for the rest of his life. Arabella and Anita, two spiders, also took an active part on their flight. These spiders were part of a Skylab mission experiment suggested by a high school student to find out if spiders would be able to spin webs in near weightlessness. Turns out they can, and that the webs they spun in space were similar to their webs on Earth, along with the monkeys, chimps, dogs, and spiders, other non-human voyagers included a cat, assorted turtles, Japanese tree frogs, roundworms, tardigrades, insects, rats, and of course mice. Our mouse had the right stuff. He was a Mousetronaut. The end, guys. Hope you enjoyed.